Hi everyone, Jonathan here again, and on the table in front of me I have, frankly, a firearm that only a mother could love, or a designer in this case. I don't know if anyone managed to guess this over on social media, because we're recording this before people have guessed, of course. If you're not aware, that's something we do, so go and check out Facebook or Instagram. Regardless, you're probably looking at this, or some of you anyway, wondering what on earth it is. It looks a bit like the ArmaLite AR-18, I think we can agree. Blocky, chunky, but even compared to that rifle, this is like a Minecraft version of a 5.56mm infantry rifle, assault rifle, whatever you want to call it. So this is, to put you out of your misery, this is the Sterling LAR, or Light Automatic Rifle. Before we get into it though, and I mean that literally because this is one we want to take apart for you, there's something else we need to grab. And I've already mentioned it. It's the ArmaLite AR-18. It's an intriguing design in its own right. It's highly influential on modern infantry rifles, or service rifles, self-loading rifles, but did not itself achieve huge sales by any means. Essentially because it was trying to kind of muscle in on the territory of the AR-15, the M16. And, well, my take at least is that any country with a military well funded enough to buy a rifle like this could stretch to the more expensive AR-15 design. And so that's what they did. Or, if they're a third world country, which this was aimed at, for their own manufacture in particular, they would just buy AKs. So this kind of fell between two stools, did not become commercially successful, was inspirational, as I say, in a number of different ways. The SA-80 is directly based upon this, G36, a few other successful designs. And it's a pretty sound design. I don't think it's ever been battle tested per se. It's perhaps best known for its usage in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, unfortunately. And that's primarily in its semi-automatic AR-180 guise. This is a bona fide ArmaLite Incorporated, Costa Mesa, California made AR-18. So this is quite an important modern historic firearm, if that makes sense, in its own right. But it's really only here because it's part of the story of the LAR. So we'll leave it there so that you can see the sort of the morph that's happened between the two designs. But in 1974, Sterling Armaments, based in Dagenham in Essex in the UK, down south, they got the license to produce that rifle, the AR-18 and the AR-180. There'd be lots of civilian and law enforcement sales potentially from the 180 version that's semi-automatic only. They also produced a short AR-18 or 180S version as well, which we have. So Sterling was moving from the 9mm submachine gun game, diversifying, trying to... They were something of a one-trick pony at that time. Great submachine gun, but as a firearms company, you need more. So they got the license to produce the ArmaLite AR-18, and they did. And a lot of the AR-18s, 180s that you see out there are Sterling Armaments manufacture. But the problem there is you're tied into a legal agreement that means you can make it, you pay the license fee, you can sell it to other countries. What you can't do is sub-license that design to a given third world country so they can make this cheaper sheet metal, gas piston driven cousin of the original Stoner AR-10, AR-15 design. And this is the first Sterling attempt at what I think I can safely call a legally different AR-18. Quick mention of the tubular section, 7.62 by 51mm rifles, automatic rifles that we've covered on the channel before. That as soon as it was identified that 5.56 was the future, discuss, they dropped the idea, any plans to make a sort of big tubular section 7.62 rifle, and they started looking at something inspired by the AR-18. And here it is. So it's got fitted to it the long 40 round AR-18 magazine. There's a 20, a 30 and a 40 round magazine. So this isn't necessarily the definitive look of this thing, but that's what's fitted to this one. And I think you can see right away that this is rough. This is a toolroom prototype. Now, this appears in, I think, a couple of publications, notably Jane's Infantry Weapons of the time, saying that it's a long stroke piston in here. So like a Kalashnikov, big long piston rod attached to a bolt carrier, and the whole thing comes back for a long stroke to reload the weapon. It's not, as you'll see. It is in fact a straight lift from the AR-18 gas system, just like Enfield were doing at the same time to create the SA-80. This, by the way, coincides almost exactly with the development of the SA-80 or the Enfield weapon system as it was known. So mid-70s, they start to tinker with this, by which time the design of the Enfield weapon system is locked in. So they are parallel developments. Sterling did not really get a look in. There was no sort of formal trial at all of this. So this is contemporary with SA-80, but was never actually a contender. That was a foregone conclusion. So what do we have here? Well, pretty basic looking wooden pistol grip, hand carved. Well, yeah, I'm going to say hand carved. Two parts of a clamshell design. This horrifically chunky folding stock, which I'll demonstrate for you now, because I'm sure you're wondering how the heck that works. And that is a not a very ergonomic latch underneath. We push that in, and that allows us to fold it up. Try not to catch my glove in the catch. There we go. So that's that. Oh, and there's a loose roll pin that stops this from moving. So there we go. So that's it folding. And then the back half, we have to reach in here with our finger and pinch. That then folds up, and then we have to concertina this into place where these metal lugs are, and we can lock it in. And then we have a nice handy carrying handle. We know how much weapons designers love carrying handles and how much armies love to ignore them. So you wouldn't have carried that by the carry handle. It's fine. So, you know, serviceable enough folding stock, but it's big, it's chunky. I mean, I guess it's relatively heavy as well. It's it locking back into place. There was a solid stock version as well. You'll find a picture of that floating around online from a book. We haven't got the solid stock. This is the only example we have of the LAR. We then have a combination of flat sheet steel folded into shape, and then machined sort of members to hold that together. Some fairly ropey roll pins, pins. The magazine catch here is a little bit exposed, but then it's on the right-hand side, so you're not going to get the SA-80A1 syndrome of accidentally dropping the magazine out. We have a slightly rough dust cover there. Incidentally, some of these features will carry over to later Sterling designs that we may or may not feature in this series. Yeah, we're going to. The whole rear sight assembly, well, not the whole, but the general form of the rear sight assembly and the front sight, and even the gas block design, pretty close to AR-18. Much chunkier lower receiver, so big, square, boxy thing, whereas the 18 has boxy upper receiver and a more svelte, slim lower receiver. It's lighter, it's frankly a better design. This is all very boxy. Magazine well is incorporated into the same stamping. So this section here that is a bit more slim. And it has to be that slim, of course, to properly fit the magazine. So moving forwards, we have sheet metal handguard up here. It's got a push button that retains it, and a wooden lower handguard over that metal shield. So a little bit of an afterthought. Needless to say, I think all of this would have changed if this thing had gone forward for for mass production. Unlike the AR-18, which just has a single position gas port arrangement with the gas block, this has an adjustable regulator. So you push that in with a tool and rotate. So the off position there's an off position, an adverse position, and a normal position. And you just turn it clockwise for more gas, basically, by pushing it in and turning it. That's it, really, except to say, well, I haven't mentioned the designer's name. So Frank Waters was Sterling's chief designer. They brought other people on at different times, but Waters was the main man. And the serial number on this, W for Waters, EX for experimental, 001. This is the first, as far as I know, unless there's a separate serial number range. If anyone else has any rare prototype Sterling assault rifles lying around, please let us know. The selector, of course, there, and that is marked safe, and then 20, meaning full auto, and then it rotates down to the bottom, and it is 3 for 3 rounds. And this thing has a fascinating form of 3-round burst limiter in it. So a bit like M16A2, this one works off, well, I'll show you, I can show you as much as I can show you without taking the trigger mechanism out of the housing, because I'm not going to do that on this one-off rifle. So it is a 3-round burst. And that's about it. So let's take it apart and show you just how ArmaLite this is. Right, as always, the first thing we want to do is remove the magazine. Get that out of the way. And to cock the weapon. Now, this is where it gets awkward, because we have to pinch and slap. We have to pinch in these while levering the upper receiver away from the lower receiver. And then in theory what we would do is slap the lower receiver to separate it. But, you know, museum piece and everything, so I'm going to be a little bit tentative. There we go. So it's two little plunger things. It's not maybe the best way of doing it. And we can see right away that we have this back plate here that forms the rear of the gun. But then the stock is attached at the bottom. So that's very different to the AR-18. And I'll say right away as we start to look at this, it's quite hard to disentangle the detail of this, but essentially this is avoiding the patents that pertain to the AR-18. Now there are 3 relevant patents. The first, well, not in any particular order, but there is one for the folding buttstock assembly. Well, there isn't a side folding buttstock on this. They're already safe with that one. There is a gas system specific patent for the AR-18. It's very slightly different. It has to do with the shape of the components as far as I can tell. So easy enough to get around that one by having components that are slightly differently shaped, which you'll see in a moment. And then the overall design patent is highly specific. But thank you to Mike Burns of Bloke on the Range for explaining how firearms patents work to me as best he can, to my curatorial brain. Because there's a critical feature here, which is a hinged receiver with a latch. So he believes, and I'm sure he's right, that the critical feature, well, the critical features are all of them as described, but specifically the way the AR-18 opens up. And this does it in a completely different way. So if you're thinking, that's really awkward, why would you want to do it that way? It's almost certainly because Sterling was having to avoid ArmaLite's patents. So that's simple enough, and that breaks the gun open, as they said at the time, like a shotgun for convenient stripping. It's a feature we've had since at least, well, the Sturmgewehr for one. So much for how the gun actually fixes together, which is critical in terms of the sort of history around this piece. The next step for disassembly is really awkward to show you. So I think what I have to do is be very careful not to damage the woodwork. If I hold it like this, you should be able to see we actually have a lever retaining the recoil spring and guide rods, which is quite unusual. Whether that's a patent avoidance thing, possibly. So we depress the lever, and then the gun tries to disassemble itself. So we'll remove the... Now, right away, we'll remove the recoil spring and guide rod assembly. For those of you who've seen an AR-18, that's how those work. Twin rods with springs on them. This rear part's a bit different, but yeah. So, very similar. Not something you can patent, so they didn't have to diverge from that. Then we pull back the bolt carrier. Now this is a little awkward because when the thing isn't together, it doesn't kind of run super smoothly, if that makes sense. So that comes back to a certain point. Pop out the cocking handle, very simple, turned, tapered steel piece. And then we can push this to the rear. Now, we can't remove that from the back of the gun because we have this, well, I guess we could remove that, but it's easier not to. This retention system, we'll leave that in place, and what we do instead is drop the bolt carrier out of the bottom of the receiver. And there we have, I mean, again, it's virtually identical to an AR-18 bolt carrier group. Yeah, this is very AR-18. However, you will notice details if you're an aficionado of the AR-18. The major difference, though, I'll have to take this apart to show you. So let's pop out this pin at the rear. Now this is retaining multiple things here. So, retaining pin. We then have a sort of end cap for the firing pin assembly. Then we have the sprung firing pin. This was something that Sterling were quite proud of because this was a time when the AR-15 was suffering light primer strikes. It wasn't drop safe because the inertia of the firing pin was setting off rounds inadvertently. So I think they were pushing a sprung firing pin as a safety feature. It's a very big, robust firing pin. And then we've got the third thing that little pin is retaining is another little cap. And that's holding in the tungsten, I think it's tungsten anyway, anti-bolt bounce weight. So if you shake this assembly, you hear this rattling back and forth. Now this is something that Enfield had to learn independently because they didn't have the contacts with ArmaLite, but the original AR-18, I don't think Enfield had realised or didn't think it was necessary, always had this feature. And that stops the bolt from bouncing back off the barrel, which can cause the gun to stop working. By having that weight in there, it hits and it stops. Without the weight, it hits and it bounces and you have a failure. And then the rest goes back to being like the AR-18, or even the 15 for that matter. Cam pin. Now, here's where it gets different. Well, this is already quite different. You might argue unnecessarily complicated. I have in fact missed a bit, because this little, this pin here, this trips the disconnector in the gun. Instead of having a surface on here, that they've actually got a pin that sticks out the bottom, so that has to come off as well. All getting very complicated. And then the final thing, the bolt head. Now you'll notice that the extractor dropped off there. So this is the extractor that hooks the case out of the fired case out of the breech, of course. That's what an extractor does. Whoops. So that is a Sterling patented feature. Look at that. What's so great about that? Well, the idea is, instead of having another pin here, so the AR-15 and AR-18 have a pin to retain the extractor in place, so the whole thing comes out, you leave your extractor in the bolt while you clean it normally, but you can pop out the pin and remove it, and if you need to get in and around it. Frank Waters' patented feature was that there's no pin, and the whole thing is retained by the bolt carrier, so you just put it in. Yeah, and on the face of it, that looks nice and simple, doesn't it? But, well, a couple of problems I can see there. Firstly, you've overcomplicated the bolt carrier group already. Maybe that was a patent avoidance, I don't know. So simplifying the bolt head, if you like, by one pin doesn't really help you very much. And much more importantly, you can see the amount of wear on this. Well, that shows you how much pressure is on the inside of this bolt carrier. So whereas the bolt should be a nice sliding fit in here, it's under constant spring tension, under pressure the whole time, inducing friction on that bolt, which you don't want. That's just one extra place where you can have a failure, or it can add to other effects and cause a stoppage that way. So there's a reason why nobody else has done this Sterling patented feature. And spoiler alert, neither did Sterling, because the designers that followed this abandoned this. The one patented feature of the whole thing is abandoned immediately. But, so there we go. Many, many parts. I guess we include the bolt, the cocking handle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 parts to the bolt. Now, if I remember rightly, that's the same, sorry, the bolt carrier group. If I remember rightly, that's the same number of parts as an EM2 bolt, which is famously overcomplicated. So the Brits knocking it out of the park again with this design. My apologies to any friends, family, or Frank Waters himself for denigrating his work here. But in retrospect, with hindsight, this is perhaps a little bit overcomplicated. So we'll move all of these various bits out of the way, and I have the fun of putting those back together later on, hopefully in the right order. And we'll have a quick look at the rest of the gun. Okay, we won't get into the weeds too much on the trigger mechanism because there's a lot of parts in here, but I suppose that's one point to make. Unlike an AK or an AR trigger, there's a lot going on in here. Now that's in part because it has a roller, a triangular roller cam thing to trip 1, 2, 3 shots, and then there's a flat on the bar itself, and that allows the disconnection effectively. So you get 1, 2, 3 shots, and then your trigger is disconnected. I'll try and show you that. So we have a tripping lever up here, standard for a select fire weapon. The bolt will override that. The little peg on the bottom of the bolt carrier that I showed you, and that will in automatic or burst mode allow the hammer to go forward. So a very unusual looking hammer design there, but it has bents or hooks on the back there as part of its functioning. But if I move that fully out the way, you can hopefully see the roller. So every time I'm moving that roller, a different flat surface is being presented, and somewhere in there, hopefully, if I move my finger out of the way each time, you'll see the flat surface on the center bit of rod that's giving a bit of clearance to the mechanism. Sorry to be vague, but I am not stripping this thing. So in terms of how it moves from one position to the next, so safe position at the top, then we hit single shot there, or semi-automatic. Then we move to 3-round burst, and that's when this roller comes into play. I don't want to poke it with the steel drift, so hence the finger. Hopefully you can see that with me just manually turning it. Yep. And then up to fully automatic. So wherever the lever is pointing is where it's working. There isn't a pointer on the other side like on an AR. It is where the lever is pointing on here. So just to reprise that for you. So safe, semi, 3-round burst, and automatic. So yeah, I would call it a Swiss watch, but I'm not sure that's too apt a description. And then the final bit, so we have our standard AR family multi-lugged bolt, of course, and that locks into the recesses in the chamber. We don't need to go into that. And then just to show you this gas system, press in the button, pull out the top cover. So with the cover off, we have got an absolutely standard AR-18 gas system here. The regulator up here, which is adjustable as noted, so that's how it adjusts. Push, turn, click, push, turn, click. And then the adverse position, as in for snow, ice, mud, that kind of thing. So that's one piece, and then if I pop this off without pulling out the regulator, slightly awkward, there we go. Finding the angle for this to pop out, there we go. So we have a connecting piece in the middle that's just a metal tube. This is the part that actually thwacks the bolt carrier. Clonk, and that goes flying back. And that lives in there with a spring on it, so it can come forward again. And then the actual piston that drives the heart of the gun, just like a car engine piston, is this. So this is what we mean by a short stroke piston system, whereas a long stroke system, like an AK, all of that would be welded together, would be one piece, and it would be welded or attached to the bolt carrier. And the whole thing would come back, giving you a lot of weight moving back and forth. This system is in theory a bit more accurate because there's less in the way of mass coming back. And then if you want to, you can pop out the regulator as well. So there we are, that's the whole thing. Again, in multiple pieces, but no more pieces than the AR-18. And you can see now the barrel profile, the chamber area is obviously thicker there. And that's about it, guys. So you see what I mean, hopefully, that heavily AR-18 inspired, but it does diverge in quite a number of areas from that original design. So the legacy of this thing, well, it was to be the first in a short series of Sterling assault rifles. This one was unsuccessful, fair to say. For reasons I can't fully go into without showing you the next one in the series. So I'll keep that a little mysterious at the moment. But suffice to say that quite a few features of this did carry over into the rest of that series. Others were abandoned later on. I think it'll be quite interesting to cover that in due course. But this was actually briefly advertised for sale, apparently. I guess preemptively, in case anyone was interested, and they weren't. So it didn't go anywhere. But as I say, it didn't just die, it got evolved into something else that we will show you at some point in the future.